Good evening to everyone.
Good evening, sir.
Today is the fourth day of our webinar, the FDP program on material testing in engineering applications. Dr. A. Velayudham, Additional Director, CVRDE, has kindly accepted our request, and he is going to deliver the lecture on material testing in CVRDE and in general. So let me now hand over the mic to my colleague to introduce Dr. A. Velayudham.
Good afternoon, all. I'm very happy welcome and introduce our today's chief guest. He is Dr. A. Velayudham, Scientist G, retired CVRD DRDO. Now currently he is a visiting professor in Anna University. He has 38 years experience in various capacities covering new product development, manufacturing, material selections, processing, heat treatments, mechanical and metallurgical testing, quality assurance, and various administration and training the manpowers. His research and development programs are prototype development, process planning, conventional machining and gear cutting, CNC part programming, CNC machining, heat treatment, maintenance of machine tools, industry R&D interactions, and transfer of technologies and quality assurance. He has finished his master's from Anna University, Production Engineering in the year 1991 and his doctorate from IIT Madras in the year 2005 in Mechanical Engineering. He has published various papers, international journals and national journals. His some accolades received are National Technology Day Development for the year 2009 for the oration on trends in micro and nanotechnologies, received Jawaharlal Nehru Memorial Award. He has received Laboratory Scientist of the Year 2017 from the Director CVRD. We are very happy to have you, sir. We are very happy to have you, and it's a pleasure to share your experience with us. Thank you, sir. Now the session is yours, sir.
Thank you, sir, for your nice introduction. Let me straight away go into the presentation. Already you were introduced. Okay, good evening, everyone and all. So I have more, experience in the machining field than in the metallurgical field. But during our machining time, there are a lot of components failed, and we also investigated. We carried out a lot of field investigation. We have studied the materials. Okay. My outline of presentation is I want to introduce about the concept of characterizations, what is the importance, what are the techniques used to characterize the materials, some of the characterizing techniques like optical microscope, electronic microscope, spectroscopy, and scanning probe microscope. Then finally, the heat as a probe to conduct the testing on materials with respect to temperature, there is thermal testing. So we know very well the material plays a vital role in every field, in engineering field, especially in the mechanical field. One has to characterize the material in order to study its consequent properties. Without knowing the properties, the selection of material is very difficult. It's not possible because the structure has got a correlation with the property. We have to study the structure. So material characterization is a fundamental process in the field of material science, without which no scientific understanding can be made on the materials. Characterization, when used in material science, it refers to a broad and general process by which material structure or properties are probed, measured, and determined using a variety of analytical techniques and tools. If you see, the material characterization represents many different disciplines depending upon the background of the user. The concept of material requirements or material characterization ranges from that of scientist to mechanical engineer. The scientist thinks in the way in terms of atomic terms because he is interested in atomic level characterization. Process engineering thinks in terms of procedures, the properties, and quality assurance. That is why nowadays, even in the drawing, we have to specify the quality assurance requirement in terms of structural properties, which I will cover when we are discussing about the selection of materials. Depends upon the time availability. Then mechanical engineer who thinks of it in terms of stress distribution. That is there any residual stress is there? How the heat transfer will take place? What is the structure? Because the structure is in turn is going to discuss, consequence about the heat transfer and that stress. There are several definitions about the metal characterization. Now, the popular definition adopted from the Committee on Characterization of Materials and Materials Advisory Board, National Research Council. It defines the metal characterization such that the characterization describes those features of a composition and structure, including defects of a material that are significant for a particular preparation, study of properties, or use, which suffice for reproduction of the material. So this is a prominent definition given by the Metal Research Board. The metal characterization has two main aspects. One is measuring the physical and chemical properties and then determining the structure of material so that we can have a better correlation between these materials and the structure. Let us see what is the need for the metal characterization. That's what we have seen. The properties dictated by the microstructure, and microstructure is dictated by the processing routes, like different shaping processes or different machining processes. So the process route used to manufacture a compound like shaping process, thermal gradient, thermal treatment, etc., or mechanical working, effectively determines the microstructure or micro features. The entire microstructure, like grain size or precipitates or second phase particles, in turn decides about some of the engineering properties. There are some properties are insensitive to the microstructure, and some are sensitive to microstructure. So we are concerned with the properties which are sensitive to microstructure. Some properties which are insensitive, like elastic constant, is very insensitive. Thermal expansion coefficient is also insensitive to our properties. Okay, but some are sensitive, like the yield strength, because yield strength is going to decide about, it depends upon the grain structure, grain size, or the second phase particle in this, isn't it? All these things is going to be give the property story about the material. In terms of structure sensitive yield strength, not only yield strength, the fracture toughness is another important property dictated by the microstructure. Thermal conductivity, electrical resistivity, all these things going to have a correlation with the structure. Okay, so it is very important to study the structural characteristics or material characteristics. So this is going to helpful about to learn about the material, to learn about the process. In the case of servicing, why it is failing, isn't it? What went wrong, and also it is useful to certify the material, especially in the aerospace material, authenticity for testing, and then to establish the quality assurance checks or quality control checks, especially in the material side, and then develop the reference standards or library, which will be taken for the calibration or comparison. So not only this, the surface topography features like the effect is controlled by the friction, wear, fracture, etc. The surface hardness, residual stress, plasticity will be going to be dictated to study the surface integrity or some features like over-tempered martensite or untempered martensite, plastic deformation, all these things need to be studied through metal characterization so that we can study the properties. Any material is a function of properties of material or performs a material function of chemistry, microstructure, then processing defects. So if you want to confirm the performance of material, or if you want to ensure the performance of any material, you should control these. It is chemistry you have to control, or you have to control the phase, you have to control the microstructure, you have to control the defects. Because you can't completely avoid the defect, but you have to quantify the defect, what is allowed defect. Because nothing is perfect in any engineering field. There will be always some impurity. So you have to control these. So the defects also should be controlled. In addition to this, during service, the performance of material is going to be degraded because of the creeping in of so many other things like in service environment, like change in the composition during service, because something will change because of the let us take a cutting tool. Let us say cutting tool. There will be some what is called some alloy will get depleted. Some alloy will depleted. Let us say a welding of stainless steel. Some chromium will get depleted. That means there is a change in the composition and change in the microstructure because of when it is going to undergo some temperature, it's going to change the temperature. Microstructure is going to change, and sometimes some defects will be introduced during process. Let us take a welding process. Okay, material is good. When you are doing the welding, amount of defects is going to be induced. Or when you are doing some drawing or extrusion, some amount of defects is going to be introduced. Or some cases service-related defects. Suppose some component is going to be in the service. It is going to have a fatigue, thermal fatigue, like a aerospace components are superalized. Some amount of service-related defects may come. Sometimes some vibrations, metal may undergo vibration during the service. So those defects also will, in turn, dictate the performance of material. So for these things, we should understand the metal characteristics. This is another slide which is discuss about the full cycle metal characterization. That is, performance is dictated by the performance specifications. It should be dictated with the material specifications and design deliverables. So we have to, together we have to see not only the material science, we have to see material engineering. Together we have to see so that we can analyze the full cycle material characterization. So the characterization not only with the final product, right from starting material characterization. If you take aerospace materials, like when you want to produce some components for aerospace, you have to control the material right from the melting. You would have a proper history right from melting. What furnace you use, what the properties you have aimed, what is the temperature, what is it calibrated, instruments are calibrated, or a furnace is calibrated, how much you are, what those things to be characterized. It is called starting material characterization, because it's very difficult to predict the performance without the root or without tracing that, without having the traceability of the defects. So in order to have a better traceability, we should have a characterization right from the starting materials. That means the ingot must have a proper traceability. Where it is melted, what is the batch size, which batch it was melted, okay, what was the impurity level, all these things to be characterized. It is called starting material characterization. It is called a qualified material or certified material in the terms of aerospace. We call it as a certified materials. That means if it is certified material, we can right away you can use it. Otherwise, you have to get it certified by carrying out all these starting material characterization. Then processing characterization, in-process characterization. So what is the type of machining? What is the type of process? It's a joining process, a machining process, or a drawing process, a forming process. the deformation induced process. So these things you have to characterize. Then after the production of the components, you have to do your final product characterization. In terms of the you have to see, is there any change in the chemistry during service? Let us say you are going to do some welding. As I mentioned earlier, you are going to use weld a stainless steel material. So you have to select a right material which is not depleting the chromium. When you are welding the stainless steel, the amount of chromium depletion will have. If the chromium is getting depleted, it starts corroding. Then corrosion will create a problem during service. The component will fail. The phase also will change. The homogeneity will change. The crystallinity will change. All these things, the composition is going to decide all these properties. So one, we have to see the final product as a final inspection. That is going to give you a quality assurance for your product or your assembly. Then what you see in the processing defects. During welding, there will be some cracks will be there. Some amount of micro cracks will be there, which may not be seen. The vendor might have not seen, or might have just made a overseed has gone. Okay, or he might have allowed, okay, let us pass it. So all these things, some amount of residues is also produced during thermal treatment. Their welding or the heat treatment residues will be there, which has to be characterized because this is another important property dictate about the surface integrity is very much important in the case of aerospace materials. The grain size, then microstructure, it is also another important property in the case of the creep study. It is more important in the case of aerospace material superalloys because it's going to the creep. What is the creep? Time dependent deformation at higher temperature. Time dependent deformation at high temperature. So that is going to decide about your creep strength. Okay. So all these things, important properties nowadays, the advanced materials are required. Though the materials which is normally used in the land vehicles may not be that much stringent, but whereas in the case of the advanced material like superalloys is very important. So it's very much important to characterize these things. Okay, there are different types of characterizing techniques like image, like optical electron characteristics, or surface characteristics, or structural characteristics, or elemental characteristics like that. So that's so on. Okay. Please hold on. See, in general terms, microstructural characteristics, the main techniques are, there are three important probes. That is called the visible light or the optical microscopy, or X-ray radiation or radiation probe, or electron probe or electron microscopy. There are three aspects of microstructural characterization. There are three aspects of it. One is it has to identify the phase identification, and then the sir, you are not able to get that pointer here.
Yes, sir.
Can you get the pointer here?
No,
You can't get this.
you can move your mouse on the screen.
Okay,
sir.
you are able to see, no? Mouse, you are able to see.
Yes, sir. If you move,
But sometimes, yeah, some this is there. Some what is called mouse. What is called the pointer will be there. That's why I'm asking. You can also write something, and you can also tell. But anyhow, it's not an issue.
if you
There are three aspects to be identified during the microscopic characterization. One is phase identification. Second is morphological identification, because it is going to decide about the structure or the chemistry. The third final one is the chemical, that is chemistry. What is the composition available? These three can be identified in the qualitative level or quantitative level. Okay. Okay. This slide shows the scale of microstructural features, the magnification required to reveal these features, and the common characterization techniques available for the study is shown in this slide. Like macrostructure, what level? It is like a 1x, the visual inspection or X-ray radiography or ultrasonic inspection. Okay. You can also see the production defects, porosity, cracks, and inclusion. All these things can be seen. This macrostructure can be seen. Okay. Using these techniques, visual inspection, X-ray radiography, ultrasonic. You want to go to a microstructure, the terms of 10 power 4x, it is more than 1000x or 10,000x. The scanning and transmission electron microscope, you want to study the characteristic features of dislocation, structure, substructure, grain or phase boundary, precipitation phenomena, these things. You can go for scanning electron microscope or TEM or atomic force microscope. You want to study the nanostructure, okay, you have to go use the X-ray diffraction, okay, scanning tunneling microscope. All these you can use to study the crystal and surface interface structure, point defects and point defect clusters using the common X-ray diffraction. Okay. There are 5 most common functions involved for all characterization instruments for microstructural study. Okay. Number 1, generation of the probing source. Generation of the probing source that is filtered and collimated to provide the well-defined beam or energy of wavelength. Then the specimen preparation, the very important thing in optical microscopy, or for that matter for SEM or TEM, is still very much important. The third one is the generation of useful signal for image formation. It means signal generating should be a signal should be usefully characterizing your features. What feature you want to get, that signal should be generated. You have to do like that. Then fourth one, the processing of the occurred signals. That means there will be a lot of signals. Which signals are which you have to extract the features from the signals, raw signal. Based upon the features, you have to select the correlate the your required micro feature. Then you have to interpret the results based on the signal acquired or processing features extracted. You have to interpret the results. Okay, so all these things you have to see. See, why I'm telling is there are all the methods. Okay, there are 2 forms of interaction of the probes. One is inelastic scattering interaction, and is elastic scattering interaction. In the case of inelastic scattering, in which the energy in the probe is degraded and partially converted into other forms of signal. In optical microscopy, macrostructural features may be revealed because they partially absorb some wavelengths of the visible light that illuminates the specimen. So here, if you see, the gold is silver, gold and copper is in yellow in color. So why the gold and copper is in yellow in color? Because of this phenomenon. Because the gold will absorb some wavelengths, and some wavelength of color it will reflect. It will reflect the longer wavelengths like red and yellow, whereas it absorbs the wavelengths like blue and green. Because it reflects the yellow and red, the gold and copper is looking yellow in color. That means for everything, the property is very important. Because of elastic scattering, it is responsible for the intensity peaks in X-ray diffraction spectra that are characteristics of the phases present and their orientation of the sample. Elastic scattering also leads to diffraction contrast in transmission electron microscopy, where it is directly related to the nature of the crystal lattice defects present in the sample. Okay, let us now go into the. So far, we have introduced about the concept of microstructure, what is the need and what we have to do. Now let us see the optical microscope. Optical microscope is one of the widely used optical microscopy in the engineering field, especially industries. The industries are not afford to have a very high magnification like SEM and things. You have a fun basic characterization techniques or the tools are used mostly the optical microscope. What are the principles behind the optical microscope? Image formation, magnification, and resolution. Image formation, there are three types of images. There is projection image, there is formation of shadows when an object is placed in front of a point source of image. Or optical image formed by a convex lens system as scanning image. Okay. The image formation can be illustrated by the behavior of the light path in a compound light microscope or what are the microscope that is given here. Okay, a specimen is placed at position A. Let us take A, where it is in between the objective lens, the two focal lengths from an objective lens. Light rays from the objective first converge through the objective lens and are then focused at position B and shows the magnified view of which is the inverted image, magnified image. The light rays from this inverted image are further converged by the second lens that is called the projector lens to form a final magnified image at point C. When we see with our eyes, we are not seeing the real image. The real image can be formed on a screen and a photograph. When we examine the microstructure with our eyes, the light path in a microscope goes through an eyepiece instead of a projector lens to form a virtual image on the human eye retina. That means the virtual image can be adjusted by focusing the eyepiece. In the latest thing, the compound microscope, we are using telescopic lens like that, or sometimes we are also having the CCD camera done. Okay, we take magnification. If we think about the important thing in the optical microscope is a magnification. The magnification of the microscope can be calculated by the linear optics. It is the ratio between the image and the distance between the image and the lens and the focal length of the lens. If you want to have a higher magnification, you should have a shorter focal length. The total length of a compound microscope, it is a product of the magnification objective lens and the projector lens. Okay. If you see here, if you want to have a okay, let us see. There's another important thing is resolution. See, we have seen the limitation for magnification in ophthalmology. There is no limitation. By seeing this equation, as long as it's going on increasing the focal length, you can get the higher magnification, isn't it? But it's not so. It is not so because it is the magnification limited not only by this, it's also limited by the resolution. What is resolution? Resolution refers to the minimum distance between the 2 points at which they can be easily distinguished as 2 points. The resolution of a microscope is strictly controlled by the refraction of the light. So based on the refraction of a light, you can control the resolution. When the point object is magnified, this image is a central spot. It is called the airy disk, surrounded by a series of diffraction rings, not a single part. To distinguish between two such objects separated by short distance, the airy disc should not severely overlap. Thus, controlling the size of the airy disc is the key to control the resolution. The size of the airy disc, that is D, is related to wavelength, that is lambda, and the angle of light coming to the length, that is the alpha. Okay. When you look at this equation, the shortest wavelength of visible light is about here mu is the refractive index of the medium between the object and the objective lens, and alpha is the angle. Alpha is the angle of the cone of light entering the objective lens. The product mu sin alpha is the numerical aperture. It's called numerical aperture, mu sin alpha. To achieve higher resolution, you need to have a higher aperture, higher numerical aperture, isn't it? But shortest wavelength of visible light is only about 400 nanometer, while numerical aperture depends upon the alpha and the medium between the lens and the thing. So you have to control the medium, you have to control the numerical aperture, all these things to control the resolution. Not only the resolution is very important, there are other importance is brightness, constant are important. Brightness and contrast is important. Brightness refers to the intensity of light, and contrast depends upon the light intensity. So you have to have a better brightness, you have to reduce the aperture. It has got a very drastic effect because the magnification got a lot of effect. Okay, some of the terms, depth of field and depth of focus, all these things, then aberrations of the glasses, all these things are very important. Okay, these are some of the steps to get the optimum resolution. There are some of the steps to improve the depth of field. Let us not go deep into this. Okay, he told specimen purpose is very important, like sectioning, mounting, grinding, polishing. So important specimen, the stages, because this is going to decide about your accuracy of results. Because these two, if you see, this is a improperly prior to the what do you call etching. This is after etching. You can see after etching you are able to see the structure properly. These are some of the micrographs examples. See, these are the fibers. The glass fiber reinforced polymer is near drilling. What is the projection of the fibers? These things can be visualized by the optical microscope. In the case of optical microscope, the reflection optical microscope is more widely used. It's got 3 stages: illuminating system, specimen stage, and image system. There are 2 types of lens system. One is objective lens and eyepiece. So objective lens is used to resolve the microscopic details, and eyepiece is used to magnify your microstructure. I think we have to speed up the presentation. Mr. Mahendran, till what time it is the presentation allowed? Mr. Mahendran?
Sir, till 5:20 you can proceed, sir.
Okay, so let us go a little fast because there are a lot more slides are there. You are going to give the presentation to the candidates?
If you are willing, sir, we can send the PPT to all.
Okay, that we will decide later.
Okay, sir.
As you do your regular things, you can do. Otherwise, why to have your proceedings?
Okay. 5:20 you can continue, sir.
Okay. There are other important microscope, latest microscope, conformal microscope. It is here the laser is used as a source, the current microscope. Here the main thing is you will get the surface feature only when it is photodetector as well as focus both at the sample surface and the photodetector. That is, both should be in focus. Then only you will get. There is a rotating optical pinholes which it is called in a spiral way. It is dictated. When you are rays passing through this rays, you get the overall the picture because it's going to vary. The radius is going to vary. You get a better picture. So confocal microscope is more widely used now. The optical sense. Metallurgical microscope, the applications are mainly used in the metallography, sample of ceramics, composites, plastics, etc. Special use of metal microscopes are study of the thin film study, plating study, coating study, painting, corrosion coupon study, grain size, all with the lower magnification, not with the higher magnification. Surface, but these are all very much sufficient to study the macrostructure or the microstructure, like welding and all. Surface inclusion, you can study the inclusion rating and all these things. There are 4 types of metallurgical microscope: upright microscope with reflected light only, upright metallurgical microscope with reflected and transmitted lights, inverted metallurgical microscope, more widely used inverted metallurgical microscope in industries, and boom stand metallurgical microscope. You see the magnification. See, when we compare this optical microscope and SEM, see beyond 1300x, we are not able to see. Whereas we see the magnetic microscope, even beyond 200x, we are able to discern the features very clearly. So this is the difference between the optical and electron microscope. Now we are going to move towards the electron microscope. So both are here light source is the light source, is here electron is the source of the beam. Okay, here vacuum is rotated, here vacuum is not rotated. Here glass are lenses, here magnetic coils are the lenses. Magnetic lens is coils are used as a lens, electromagnetic coils. Okay, so magnification is very less. Here you can see the higher magnification. Okay, now we'll move to the electron microscope. This is one of the fundamental things which I have given here. Electron solid interactions. Based upon the interaction with the interaction of the incident beam on the specimen, we will go to get a different signals, the electron signal and photo signals. The beam is in the normal directly it is going to incident on the specimen. This type is used mainly for machining or cutting, it is plasma cutting. Okay, electron beam welding, all these things. Suppose some characters which is going to graze over the surface, they secondary electrons. This is going to useful for the scanning electron microscope. It is going to give the surface characteristics. So some are backscattered electron. This also can be used for SEM study. Some are the low energy, or some loss energy, or some will create some photon energies. Those photon signals can be used for X-rays, X-ray spectroscopies. Some beams will transmit towards the sample as a transmitted beam. They are also inelastic scattered, elastic scattered, which is mainly used for transmitted electron beam, electron microscope. It is TEM. So based upon the signal, the application is different. So if it is a angular as signals, you can say X-rays, EPMA, EDAX and all. If it is a surface or tangential, say electrons, secondary electrons, mostly for some study. That means electrons are same only, electron is same, the source is same, depends upon the what is called the counter effect or the reflection. You go to dictate about your probe, the characteristics or the techniques which is going to be used. STEM, the C structure. These are transmitted beam. Okay, these are fundamental for all the electron beam process or electron probe analyzing techniques. Okay. The electron microscope, let us take electron microscope. There are 3 varieties, SEM and TEM and STEM. The electron microscope generate images of metal microstructure with much higher magnification resolution than light microscope. Okay. In the case of scanning probe microscope, there are scanning tunneling microscope, atomic Morse microscope, there's lot more. But we will be discussing only about the SEM, TEM, STM and AFM. Okay, because of the time constraint and also because it's going to be used very widely. With the scanning electron microscope, it is a type of electron microscope that images a sample by scanning. with a high energy beam of electrons in a raster scan pattern. In a raster scan pattern, electrons interact with the atoms that make up the sample, producing signal that contain information about the sample surface topography, composition, and other properties such as electrical conductivity. We see here a scanning electron microscope with a electron gun produces an electron beam by heating the tungsten wire. This beam is accelerated by the anode and it is focused by the deflection coils, the electromagnetic coils, which is going to scan the surface by the facility, specimen stand, which can scan the beam so that you will get the X-ray. When you are scanning, you will get the total topographic picture. The signals used by the scanning is mostly I told you various signals are there, secondary electrons and backscatter electrons. The secondary electrons and the backscatter electrons are going to be useful for the study of the scanning electron microscope. Here the electron beam typically has an energy ranging from 0.2 kiloelectron volt to 40 kiloelectron, is focused on by 1 or 2 conductor lenses. There is part of about 0.4 nanometer. When the beam passes through the pairs of scanning coils or pairs of reflector plates, typically in the final lens, to deflect the beam in the XY axis so that it scans the raster pattern. The primary electron beam interacts with the sample. The electrons lost some energy by repeated random and scattering and absorption. The energy exchange between the electron beam and the sample results in the reflection of high energy electrons by elastic scattering, emission of secondary electrons. By inelastic scattering and the emission of electromagnetic radiation, each of these can be detected by the detectors suitably in the secondary electron detectors. These detector signals will be amplified and the intensity of signals will be displayed on the brightness, the computer monitor or the digital image. Okay, this will be used for your studying the topography or the structural characteristics. What are the capabilities? The scanning electron microscope provides a valuable combination of element analysis, crystallograph analysis, the features in terms of nanometer, the order of nanometer roughly 100 times smaller than the light microscope, imaging rough surfaces. Even you can also do the surface roughness, the nano surface metrology. That's what is imaging rough surfaces. Qualitative and semi-quantitative elemental analysis and microscale features like the order of 2 micron. Identify the crystalline compounds and determining the crystallographic orientation as small as 1 micron. Okay, these are all possible by the scanning electron microscope. Typically uses the dimple rupture, cleavage, fracture, fatigue, intergranular fracture, all these things you can also see. The resolution is secondary electron imaging of surface topography 10 nanometer. If you use a backside electron, SEM 1 micron, X-ray characterization of chemical chemistry 2 micron, electron diffraction characterization structure 1 micron, all these things. Sample requirements, it can do only the electrically conductive samples. Non-electrically conductive materials, you have to do the number of preparation. For electrically conductive materials, metals, no specific preparation required except a clean metal surface. Whereas in the case of non-conducting samples, you have to do a conductive coating like gold palladium layer, thin layer you have to conduct, or carbon layer. Okay, should be in a vacuum apparatus, vacuum evaporation, and then you have to prepare the samples to get your features. So these are some of the micrographs taken from the same image showing the transgranular, intergranular fracture you can see. So to study these things, you need to have a. So all researchers who are doing the research scholars are who have done the already PhDs, they'll be knowing about the importance of SEM micrographs, without which no examiner accept your authenticity of your research. So these are all the fiber breakage and clean. This is my study. When we have studied about what is called drilling of the high fiber volume GFRP. These my students' work where you want to coat alumina coating through Deegan spraying. See how the adherence between the coating and the substrate, and what all the cracks is present when the parameters are not good. All these things are you can study and then you have to see. Next comes the transmission electron microscope. A transmission microscope is similar to the light microscope. It is a counterpart of light microscope. Okay. The main difference are the visible light is replaced by an electron ray. TM has more lenses and more apertures. Okay. The TEM contains further features arising from electrons as illumination. For example, the vacuum environment is required a TEM because collision between high energy electrons and significantly absorb the electron energy. So this is a comparison in the light microscope. Everything available in any book and all. So what are the fundamental principle, operating principle? The top portion of the column is similar to that of SEM. The electrons are produced and are accelerated down the column by a voltage differential in the electron can typically 100 to 400 kilovolt. The column must be kept under vacuum while the microscope is operating because otherwise it will get diverged. It will be diverged. As the beam passes down the microscope column, it is focused by variable strength electromagnetic condenser lenses. These condenser lenses can either focus the beam by a fine spot on the sample or flood a much larger portion of the sample with a parallel beam electrons. The transmitted beam electrons interact with the specimen, mostly ultra thin. That means your sample must be ultra thin, like a foil or like a micro, it is called wafer. As it passes through, an image is formed from the interaction of electrons transmitted through the specimen. The image is magnified and focuses onto an image device such as fluorescent screen on a layer of photograph film, or can be get through a CCD camera. What are the capabilities of TEM? Imaging of features as small as several tens of nanometer down to scale of individual crystallographic planes and atoms. Qualitative and semi-qualitative element analysis, which is spatial resolution approaching 10 nanometer, roughly 100 times better than SEM or electron microscopes. Sorry. Identifying crystalline compounds and determining the crystallographic orientation of microstructure, which is as 30 nanometer. Typical uses: characterizing dislocation arrangements resulting from deformation and annealing, identifying and characterizing the morphologies, elemental compositions, crystallographic aspects of very fine microstructural features, strengthening precipitates produced during age hardening, determining orientation relationship between the parent and product phases, matrix and twins, etc. Characterizing compositional gradients over very short distance like diffusion profiles associated with the phase transformation. Determining phase diagram by characterization of microstructural phase. Spatial resolution are 0.2 nanometer imaging, X-ray characterization of elemental chemistry 10 nanometer, electron diffraction characterization of crystal structure and orientation in the order of 30 nanometer. What are the limitations? Sample preparation is quite tedious, and only a small portion of the sample can be analyzed. Unlike SEM, where you have get a higher size sample is possible, even if the size of pi it can be possible. Here it's not like that. Elemental chemical analysis cannot be readily done for elements with atomic numbers less than 7. It's another important limitations of TEM. Care must be taken to ensure that samples are free from preparation artifacts. That means nothing should hold. When you are making the preparation, that's something that don't preparation things should not be there on the left of the samples. Only very small portions of the sample can be analyzed. So it is crucial to ensure that the microstructure characterized is representative of the bulk material. So that means whatever the bulk material you are selecting, out of which you are going to create the specimen, should have the similar characters. That means material should have a uniform character. Then only you can take any sample from out of the bulk material. It will correlate better. So these are the TEM study. Some of the pictures taken by the TEM study. That is the metal twinning. Twinning, you will be knowing very much what is twinning. Okay, all these things, twin study can be seen by using the transmission electron microscope. So next to the electron probe microscope, let us see the scanning probe microscope. Scanning probe microscope is a technique to examine materials with a solid probe of scanning the surface. Yes, scanning probe microscope is relatively new for materials characterization compared to the light and electron microscope. It is very recently added, the late 80s, sometime late 80s or the mid 80s. It examines surface features whose dimensions range from atomic spacing to a tenth of millimeter. That means it has got a wide range. The SPM is considered the most powerful tool for surface structure examination because it is, let us see the atoms, is possible only by this scanning probe microscope. The scanning probe microscope started with the scanning tunneling microscope. It was invented in 1982. And scanning tunneling microscope uses a tunneling current, a phenomenon of quantum mechanics, to examine the material surfaces. The tunneling current flows through an atomic scale gap between the sharp metallic tip and conductive surface atoms. The other improvement in STM is a scanning force microscope, or recently renamed as atomic force microscope. It was invented in the late 1980s. It uses near field forces between atoms at the slope tip, apex, and the surface to generate signal of surface topography. The AFM is more widely used than the STM because it is not restricted, but it has no restriction for the conductivity. It is not restricted to electrically conductive surfaces. So it has got a wide applications compared to scanning tunneling microscope. If you see the electron microscope and the scanning probe microscope, mostly the scanning microscope you need a vacuum atmosphere, whereas SPM is not like that. You don't need to have a vacuum, or you may need a very ambient also possible. Okay, the resolution, it is very high resolution. See, 0.123 nanometer. That means 0.1 resolution is possible. The vertical side is 0.01 nanometer. That means atomic, it is used. It is very good for the atomic resolution, but less than the atom's size. Okay, no excessive height variations on surface is occurred here in the scanning probe and tunneling microscope. Let us see the scanning tunneling microscope, how it works. You can see the picture here. It is a enlarged picture of this tungsten tip when it is touching the sample. So there is a scanner. Just get a feedback from the sample. In a scanning tunneling microscope system, a bias voltage, a a bias voltage is applied to the sample, and the tip is positioned close enough to the surface so that a tunneling current develops through the cap. That means the tunneling current should develop between the micro tip, a very sharp tip, and the sample. Not going to touch exactly, it's going to have some gap. Because this current is extremely sensitive to the distance between the tip and the surface, scanning the tip in the XY plane while recording the tunneling current permits the mapping of the surface topography to the resolution on the atomic scale. The ability to precisely position the probe on STM is made possible when there is a XYZ piezo scanner, which coupled to feedback regulator keeps track of tunneling current and precisely position the tip accordingly. The tunneling current is exponentially proportional to the distance, and thus, by a feedback loop, the tip can be maintained at constant distance from the surface by maintaining a constant tunneling current. The STM system only works for conductive surfaces because the need to establish a tunneling current need to be conductive. Okay. This is a tunneling electrons, and this is STM tip. This is a STM tip, the surface. The tunneling current will pass between the sharp tip and this atomic radius. The radius in the atomic level. And then there is a tunneling current will be generated when we are going towards the near the sample. Ideally, the STM probe tip is very pointed, 1 to 2 atoms at the end. It has a relatively low work function. J3 tungsten crystals are ideal and are nearly identical to field emitters. There are 4 types of modes of operating the tunneling scanning tunneling microscope. It is STM. One is constant current mode, which is most widely used. Here, the tunneling current is kept constant. Constant current means current is kept constant. The position of the tip must be moved up and down. That means the tip will move up and down, but the current is kept constant. This movement is recorded, then the topography of the specimen can be inferred based upon the varying the height. Because current is going to be same, because to maintain the current, constant current, it has to move up and down the tip. That movement will be recorded, then the topography can be inferred. The other counterpart is constant height mode. Alternatively, the result position of the tip is kept constant. That means you are going to maintain the height. The tunneling current will change as it moves across the surface because with respect to varying distance between the tip and the surface or specimen surface. The changes in current are recorded, then the topography of specimen can be inferred. Can provide higher scanning rate. This is compared to current mode. The third mode, spectroscopic mode, refers to the operation of recording the tunneling current as a function of either tip or sampling spacing or bias voltage. Okay, it is useful for studying the surface properties. Okay, there is a fourth mode is manipulation mode. It means refers to operation of relocating or removing the atoms on the surface. There are 4 types of mode. The constant current mode is more widely used. See, there are some of the pictures taken from the STM. See, you can see the macro image of atoms. What are the applications? Surface geometry, molecular structure, local electronic structure study, local spin structure study of single molecular vibration, nanofabrication, atom manipulation. Because there are methods of fabricating the nano particles or nano features by STM and AF. You can add material, you can build material. It is called bottom-up approach. It's called the bottom-up approach in the micro manufacturing or micro fabrication. That's why it's called nano fabrication. You can also build the structure or build the material by using the STM and AFM through manipulation. So nanochemical reaction. Next important thing is atomic force microscope. The atomic force microscope measured the asperity of the sample by using the atomic forces between the tip and the sample. You know that there will be a repulsive force and attractive force between the sample and the surface, the tip. To perform measurement, the user moves the cantilever. Actually, it is a cantilever beam will be there. When there is a change in the atomic force, the cantilever will change, will oscillate, or will deflect. That is quantified for study the structure. To perform the measurements, user moves the cantilever equipped with a sharp tip probe at its end into proximity of a sample surface to a distance of several nanometers. In order to maintain the constant force, the AFM gives feedback to the laser scanner while scanning. You are maintaining the constant force. Strictly speaking, AFM are constant measurement devices, but due to very low stylus force involved are usually considered non-contact. Though we say it is a contact, but the force is very, very low, very order of very, very low. So we are practically we are taking it as a non-contact type. AFM offers very high resolution 3D measurement capability. The limit of AFM can resolve individual atoms. Okay. AFM is notoriously difficult to calibrate. Is a limitation. But are better used for qualitative imaging the surface rather than for quantitative analysis. Another key factor which should not be ignored in the AFM is the primary measurement is based on the force and not the displacement. It is therefore possible to introduce distortion to the surface as a result of material interaction between the surface and the probe. Let us see the operation now here. If there is a, I told you this cantilever, there will be a contact force between the atomic force between the tip and the surface. This force will be maintained by when to maintain this force, whatever the cantilever distortion will be studied through the laser scanning. It will be detected by the piezoelectric or position sensitive diode. The oscillation will be detected by this diode, which will be correlated to your surface feature. This is the fundamental. It means the deflection of cantilever due to the atomic force results in a displacement of laser field and a position sensitive photodetector. Okay, the small bendings, the cantilever or displacement will be studied and which will be correlated. Okay. The lateral measuring range is determined by the piezo scanner. The lateral because scanner is going to scan over it. It is the order of 100 micron. Actually speaking, each thing will when it is moving the pixel to pixel, it will stop and then take the measurements. AFM can be operated in principle without vacuum conditions, but then the measurement is more complicated. The biggest disadvantage of AFM is the little long measurement time. The maximum scan velocities amount to 10 to 50 micrometer per second. Okay. The key element here in this is the cantilever. It is a microscopic force sensor formed by one or more beams of silicon or silicon nitride of 100 to 500 micron length and about 0.5 to 5 micron thickness. A sharp tip is mounted on the end of the cantilever, which is used to sense the force between the sample and the tip. Okay. For common topographic measurement, the probe tip is plain silicon or silicon nitride. Okay. For specific application, chips can be coated with a conductive or magnetic or bioactive material. Here is also working 3 modes. One is contact mode, non-contact mode, and tapping mode. Out of these modes, tapping mode is more popular. The contact mode, the tip is very close to the surface and the repulsive force between the tip and surface lead to the bending of the cantilever. Contact mode is more useful for hard surfaces and is rather insensitive for specific sample characteristics. In the non-contact mode, long-range forces are used. That means the distance between the tip and the surface is considerably larger than the contact mode. Typical uses of spring constant, values of spring constant for commercially available controllers are 0.01 to 15 nano-Newton per meter. The most popular form of operation mode is tapping mode. In this patented technique, the tip is brought in contact with the surface, just as in the contact mode, but is then lifted. First, you have a contact, then the lift again of the surface to avoid digging or dragging the tip across the surface. For measurement, the oscillating tip is moved over the surface until it begins to lightly touch or tap the surface. That's why it's called tapping mode. During scanning, the vertically oscillating tip alternately contacts the surface and lifts off. These are some of the measurements taken. This is called a sapphire wafer. You can see the structure. This is the tip, very sharp tip. Some method of single beam integrated tip. This is the integrated tip, unlike tip. Advantages: high resolution. That means minimum distance, capable of 3D measurement with super high magnification. Observation in atmospheric conditions is possible. There is no need for pre-treatment of sample. Capability of analyzing physical properties, electrical property, magnetic property, friction, viscosity, etc. The disadvantage is incapable of low magnification measurements. Samples with significant asperity cannot be measured. That means level difference greater than few micron cannot be studied here. Difficulties in positioning due to the need to narrow down the field of view. Analysis for each sample takes significant amount of time. Inability to measure large sample due to need for pre-treatment and processing. Relatively difficult operations. You need a trained, experienced operator for especially the spare replacement, etc. So let us move to the X-ray spectroscopy. We'll quickly go through the X-ray spectroscopy. So X-rays, you know very well what is the character of X-rays. When a fast-moving electron collides with the K-shell electrons, the electrons in the K-shell is ejected, leaving a behind the cone. Then there is some loss of energy. It will go to higher level. When it goes to higher level, again it will come back to the lower energy level. Because the energy difference, there will be a photon will be generated. That is going to be used as a spectrum or kinetic spectrum for the studying the element. There are three types of spectroscopy. One is the transmitted or diffracted radiation. One is the transmitted radiation and fluorescent radiation. X-ray diffraction or diffracted radiation. These methods are based on the scattering of X-ray by the crystals. By using this method, the crystal structure can be identified. This method is most widely used in the X-ray spectroscopy. Because of transmitted radiation, this is similar to other methods of absorption like electromagnetic spectra of UV or IR spectroscopy. It gives information about the absorbing material. In this method, a beam of X-ray is passed through the specimen and a fraction of X-ray photons absorbed, and this is considered to measure the concentration of specimen materials. It means based upon the photons absorption, the concentration or measurement is made. It is used only to detect imperfection in the crystal structure, element analysis, thickness measurements, etc. This method is least used when compared to other methods. Extrafluorescence. In this method, X-rays are generated within the sample, and by measuring the wavelength and intensity of generated X-rays, it is possible to perform qualitative and quantitative analysis. X-ray fluorescence can be considered a sample three-step process occurring at the atomic level. The incoming X-ray knocks out an electron from one of the orbitals surrounding the nucleus within an atom of material. A hole is produced in the orbital, resulting in high energy, unstable configuration for the atom. To restore the equilibrium, an electron from the high energy outer orbital falls into the hole. Since this is a low energy position, excess energy is emitted in the form of fluorescence X-ray. Okay. There are two main types of XRF spectroscopy. That is energy dispersive XRF and wavelength dispersive XRF. The main difference in these fluorescent X-rays are detected and analyzed. We will see here about the wavelength dispersive XRF. Used mostly for qualitative as well as the quantitative analysis. The case of qualitative analysis, typically elements from sodium through uranium can be detected simultaneously with a good quality spectra obtained in a very short time. Okay. Also, it is a reference. It can also generate reference standards for quantitative results. The intensity is obtained. It is calibrated to the plot. As a study the structure or the properties of the material. In the case of quantitative XRF technique, the peak height for any element is directly related to the concentration of the element within the sampling volume. Our care must be taken since two or more elements can interact with each other, resulting in the skewed results. Okay. Next, the X-ray diffraction, which is most widely used in the industry. X-rays are electromagnetic bursts are visible light, like visible light, but the X-ray wavelength is much shorter than the visible light, in the order of 0.1 nanometer. X-ray diffraction methods are based on the phenomena of wave interferences. The in-phase structure will have the constructive interference. The out-of-phase waves will have a destructive interference. When they have a phase difference in terms of n lambda, it is called in-phase constructive interference occurs, which is when they have a phase difference of n lambda by 2, completely out of interference will have. When they have the constructive interference, that means the reflected waves will not. When they have a n lambda, that means the relation between the wavelength and the theta or the lattice spacing in terms of n lambda 2d sin theta, then constructive interference will occur. That means the path difference is n lambda 2d sin theta, which is you will have a better you get a constructive interference. The path difference depends upon the incident angle and spacing between the planes, that is interlaminar spacing. In order to keep these beams in phase, their path difference, that means if you see here, there is an incident beam, it is a refracted beam. The first beam is a beam 2. When both the beam are in the same phase, also when it is refracted beams also in the same phase, you will get a constructive interference A plus A like this. That means you will get a same phase, you will get a resultant wave in a phase concurrence. Suppose the wave difference is out of phase, third wave is out of phase, you will not get a constructive interference, you will get a destructive interference. You get. Here, the path difference between these two waves is equal to SQ and TQ. Okay, it is equal to 2d sin theta, because this is a d, this is d sin theta, this is another d sin theta. Where these two, the 2d sin theta. This is 2 times d sin theta. It is equal to n lambda, then you will get a interference. That means constructive interference. We are able to obtain information on the spacing between atomic planes of crystal when constructive interference detected a given incident angle and a wavelength of incident beam based on the Bragg's law. That is, it identifies when it satisfies the Bragg law, it identifies the angle of the diffraction peak occurs. That means there will be a diffraction peak can be seen. Knowing the spacing in the crystallographic planes by diffraction methods, we can determine the crystal structure materials. For example, the planes here the cubic is related to the lattice parameter. That means A. By this, that means the HKL plane A divided by root of h squared k square plus square. These are all the Miller indices terms, parallel planes in a crystal lattice. Let us not go deep into this. Combining this Bragg law and this equation, we'll get a relationship sin square theta equal to lambda squared by 4a squared and squared k square squared. Converting these into HKL, we will get the plane index like 001 or 110 like that. Depends upon whether it is mixed or unmixed. So by studying these mixed or unmixed, you can find out what is the structure. Whether it is base center structure or body center structure or place center structure. But in the case of HKL, all are unmixed. Let us say 111 is unmixed. Let us take here 200 again unmixed. 220 again unmixed because even. All are even. All are even. All are odd. These all are odd. So that means this is unmixed. There is no mixing of even and odd. So you are able to get the intensity. So this is 2 theta. That is the angle between the diffracted beam and the incident beam. This is the intensity. By quoting the intensity and the 2 theta, you can find out the what is your feature. What is the crystallographic nature? What is the crystal structure? Can be studied. Actually, we need not have to calculate. There are Scherrer formula to calculate, but no need to calculate that. Nowadays, there are standard rules or the computer programs are there which will give your correlate your results. So these are all the different 2 theta values or the graphs in intensity of the 2 theta for the copper K alpha radiation. This is going to be used as a X-ray source. This is again when you want to study suppose you are going to do some coating. You are going to do some coating. What is the phase of the coating? That you can study. So is it really alumina coating is there or not, or simply people are bluffing? That also you can see by seeing analyzing the intensity and the corresponding 2 theta. 1 minute. Even the diffraction, there are X-ray diffraction or neutron diffraction. Okay. Okay. X-ray diffraction, there are 3 important methods. One is law method, rotating crystal method, and powder method. Mr. Vadivel sir, Manikandan. Hello.
Yes, sir.
So what time will you stop?
No problem, sir. You can go ahead. It is up to 5:30, sir.
Okay. We will try to complete it before that. Okay, X-ray diffraction, there are 3 methods: law method, rotating crystal method, and powder method. So we will study one by one in detail. So law method, in this method, you find X-ray beam. Of about 0.5 nanometer diameter is allowed to strike a stationary single crystal. The photograph record is obtained by film about 3.4 centimeters away. The diffracted beams from arrays of spots that lie in curves on the film. The Bragg angle is, you can see here, there are 2 types of law method. One is back reflection method and then the transmission method. The transmission method, the film is kept between the incident beam and then the what is called behind the crystal to record the beams. Behind the crystal, there is the film is beam is, what is called photofilm is kept. In the case of back reflection, the crystal is behind the incident beam, not with the incident beam. That means the back reflected will be reflected onto the film. So based upon this, you are going to study your characteristic. So application of law method is you can study the grain orientation, lattice distortion, precipitation phenomena, etc. Although it can also be used to determine the crystal structure, several wavelengths can reflect in different orders from the same set of planes with a different orders reflection superimposed on the same spot in the film, which makes the crystal structure determinations difficult. So this can be avoided by rotating crystal method. Because of rotating crystal method, there will be a crystal will be fixed in the rotating arrangement. That means that there will be a shaft, it will be rotating about the axis. The incident beam, when it is passing through the aperture, when it is rotated, the crystal is rotated based upon when it is meeting the condition of the n lambda 2d sin theta, the corresponding diffraction pattern will be reflected onto the beam, the reflected beam, what is called cylindrical film, which is kept inside the cylindrical beam film. That is studied. Those things will be studied by the rotating crystal method. Because of powder method, the specimen is in the form of fine powder. Okay, in the compacted form or loose powder adhering to the fine hair. A crystalline material, polycrystalline material of a fine grain size is wire or in the form of sheet can also be used. They require that a large number of small crystals are in every possible position with respect to incident beam. Because in the powder form, there may be a lot of crystals will be in the incident beam. The photograph film is either placed normal to the main X-ray beam or kept in the circular way also. Okay, cylindrical way about an axis normal to the main beam. At this place, many crystals are present, all having that different orientation. Some crystals will have oriented such that they satisfy the Bragg relation for a given set of lines. The main aim of all these things is you should see that you are getting the correct orientation you are going to get which satisfy the Bragg relation. Another group orientation will be such that the Bragg relation is satisfied for another set of plane and so on. In a rotating like that, you will get. Here we are not rotating actually the what is called the crystal or the sample. Here this get a lot of diffracted beams are there from the powder. That's why we are going to get. Application of X-ray diffractions provides information on structure, phases, preferred crystal orientation, other structural properties such as grain size, crystallinity, strain, crystal defects, etc. Exotic peaks are produced by constructive interference of a monochromatic beam of X-rays scattered at specific angles from each set of lattice planes. The peak intensity, what you have seen, are determined by atomic positions of the lattice plane. Consequently, XRD pattern with a fingerprint of periodic atomic arrangements in a given material. An online search for standard database, I told you, are there to identify the crystalline samples. Finally, we have seen so far, we have seen the light, the electron, or the radiation probes. Now we are going to see it as a probe, we are going to see. These techniques provide thermodynamic information about the sample referring to the thermal stability, decomposition pathways, viscoelastic properties of a material, phase changes, etc. Colorimetry and thermal methods commonly used are thermogravimetric analysis, differential scanning colorimetry, differential mechanical thermocalorimetry, and one more, thermomechanical analysis. Thermomechanical analysis is most widely used to study the material which is used in the high temperature environment, like the superalloys like Inconel or the Mnemonics alloy or Monel, something like that, or the other titanium alloys. So we will study mostly about the differential scanning. Here in this, we are going to see only the differential scanning, calorimetry, and then differential thermal analysis. Thermal analysis is a group of analytical techniques that measures properties or property changes of material as a function of temperatures. Changes in the material properties with the temperature are considered as thermal events. That means, so whatever the events are going to change, that we are going to study. Commonly used methods, I told you, thermogrammetry and different, this we have seen. Okay, what are the events? What are the events going to change? Are going to be measured? Mass change, temperature difference, heat flow, length, deformation, all these things going to be corresponding techniques we are given here. This we are going to measure by the corresponding techniques. At absolute zero, a solid does not have any thermal energy. That means at the 0 degree Kelvin, there is no thermal energy. And it means that atoms are static. There is no vibration or rotation of atom bonds. With increasing temperature, thermal energy gains in the solid will increase. With increasing temperature, the thermal energy gains in the solid will increase the vibration rotations of the atomic bonds. When the amplitude of vibration reaches a certain level, the following changes in the solid maker. The solid is in the inert atmosphere, like solid phase transformation, glass transition, melting, sublimation, and thermal decomposition. These things you have to see, depends upon the reaction, the events can be studied. The differential thermal analysis, the principle is, the basic principle is a temperature difference. A sample and reference samples are placed in a furnace. The temperatures between the sample and the reference is measured by two thermocouples. One is in contact with the underside of the sample holder, the other is in contact with the underside of the reference holder. The reference should be made from a material that satisfies the following conditions. It does not undergo thermal events over the operation thermal range. It does not react with any component in the instrument and has similar thermal conductivity and heat capacity to the sample being examined. This is the fundamental principle for studying the differential thermal analysis. The temperature difference between the sample and reference should be 0. Okay. No thermal events occurs in the sample because similarly, this is what we have seen. When a thermal event occurs in the sample, non-zero T will be generated. The T will be negative if the thermal event is endothermic, or positive if it is exothermic. The endothermic event makes the sample temperature lower than the reference temperature that follows the heating program closely. These are all the DTA curve. That means the time dependent on the event. Based on this, you can correlate your event, thermal event, and the thermal change you can see. In the case of thermal scanning, calorimetry, here there are separate heat fluxes designed to measure the heat flow difference between sample. Again, there are two varieties: heat flows, differential scanning calorimetry, power compensated differential scanning calorimetry. Okay. The heat flux DSC is also called quantitative DE because it measures the temperature difference. Now let us see the principle first. Okay. Here power compensated DSC is most widely used. It is kept in a separate furnace, unlike earlier what you can see in DTA. Okay. When a thermal event occurs in the sample, the power to the heating element has to change in order to maintain the sample temperature, the same as that of the reference. This event is correlated. Endothermic event causes an increase in power to heat the sample. An exothermic event causes the reduction in power to heat. The amount of power change should be equal to energy of heat flow to compensate for the heat release or gain of sample. That means depends upon the change in the temperature, the event will change. That by considering the temperature, taking the temperature, you can difference temperature, you can study the event. Okay, this is the comparison that is going to go into deep place. Applications, application of inorganic materials, determination of heat capacity, determination of phase transformation, phase diagrams, application to polymers, mostly this use of polymers, determining the temperatures like glass phase temperature, crystallization temperature, melting temperature, or study the properties of polymer like crystallinity, curing status, polymer content, stability, all these things. Mostly the thermal analysis mostly is for application of polymers. Okay, there are some of the reference for the taking the preparing the presentation. Thanks for your listening. This let me conclude my presentation. Thanks for your patient listening for continuously 1.5 hours without any break.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening, sir.
Thank you very much, sir, for sharing your valuable knowledge and experience on various material characterization techniques and their applications.
In fact, I wanted to give some case studies what we have faced in our DRDO, but only thing is time constraint was there. So this is a full like anything. Okay. Tell me.
Well, sir. The session was very useful and indeed informative. I hope all the participants agree with me. Now I request the participants to post their questions in the chat box. I would read it up to Dr. Velayudham sir for further discussions, if any.
Okay, you need to have a lot of fundamentals you have to study. Crystal lattices, this millarities, all these things. Without that, understanding or appreciating the picture will be difficult because it needs a lot of fundamentals to be studied. Isn't it?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Definitely.
So we should have a correlation, then only it is possible to.
The characterization is very important for understanding the properties and importance of the material.
It gives only an introduction about an overview, but you need to have a separate session for each topic so that you can cover in depth and then you become like an academic now. Then. Only it is an eye opener. People should take this as a basis. They should continue to study with the literature or whatever the reference, and then they'll become a pandit. Over a 1.5 years, 1.5 hours, we can't become a pandit. It's only an eye opener.
For research scholars, it is very useful.
Oh, yes, it will be useful. If people don't have to, if you have any clarification, you can also send through mail ID. I think our convener will give you your mail ID. You can also post. The participants can also post the questions to the mail. I'll try to answer if possible. Or you can also refer these references, which will give the detailed study.
Yes, sir. There is one question like comparing SEM and AFM, which one is preferable?
See, both are different. Some study and this study, both are different. If you take the scanning probe microscope, I'll tell you. SEM is going to take about the study in the level of both level also different. Both levels are different. I'll tell you what is the fundamental difference between the two. SEM is mostly it is for the study of higher level thing. Whereas if AFM, it is an atomic force side, atomic side. There is a contact side, a contact is a non-contact. Mostly the AFM coming on non-contact side. The resolution is very atomic side. It is a there is a here you are going to study the based upon the energy, that is secondary electrons. How the loss of energy is there when you are impinging on this. Atomic is not, there is no direct electrons is not involved, and the loss of energy, those things are not involved. Mostly it depends upon the force, the attractive and repulsive force between the atoms. That is going to be useful. So both are different.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
And you can build the nanostructure or nano materials using the AFM. It's called a bottom-up approach. That means for microfabrication or nanofabrication, atomic is possible because you can also build material. Whereas SEM is not so.
Sir, the next question is, for polymer nanocomposites using SEM, how to study dispersion of nanoparticles?
Yeah, this is SEM will give the details. No, you take a lot of people have studied this using SEM, the nanoparticle study. It's a normal technique. It's a normal study. It's very well. It is in the field. SEM you can directly take. You can go to the. Only thing is, if it is a non-conductive, you have to give a conductive coating, and then you have to study. That is a thing. You have to do some conductive coating. You have to give. Because I have studied even the glass fiber reinforced plastic with some we have to add some sample preparation, very important. But it is possible.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Why XRD is important in material characterization?
See, XRD application is quite different because it is the mostly is process oriented. That means when you are going to produce some components, what are the changes taking place in the atomic level, or is there any defects present going to be present like residual state? If you see the application of XRD, it is quite absorbing. If you can study the defect, because it is going to be related to the atomic size, isn't it? Because this X-rays is going to see the atomic level study. It is going to be correlated with its properties like subatomic properties like residual cells. Let us say residual cells is very important. If you want to study the crystallography, if you want to study what are the phases present in this, these things are very important. XRD is very important. XRD only going to give all these things.
Okay, sir.
Nowadays, even if the people who are following the process industries, like the what is called product manufacturing industries, they are having powder-based XRDs to study is there any particles present inside. Because when you are going to do some non-traditional machining, is there any change in the surface? Is there any impurities or any foreign particles going into this? These things are people are studying because the performance is very important.
Yes, sir.
Aerospace people also, they are taking XRD is very important tool for because it is going to decide about the performance of the component.
Sir, one more question. How to check for wear on internal surfaces? For example, wear study of bearing races.
Oh, bearing. Okay. So internal surface, like pin on disk external, how you are doing the internal? That's what his question is.
Yes, sir.
Isn't it? Okay. I think it is not should not be a bigger big problem. Only thing is, see if you take but I haven't come across such instruments, but it is possible. How it is possible? I'm telling you. You can convert the lathe into let us say, because we are machining persons, I can tell easily. Let us take a machining lathe. Let us take a machining lathe. You can convert the lathe as a pin and disc instrument. Pin and disc experiment. I mean the equipment. Nothing but there is no much difference. If you fix the bit as like a boring tool in the instead of the lathe and in the lathe, you can definitely do. You can create the specimen. You can keep your what is called your the pin and as a tool, like a boring tool. You can study. This is what my only thing is you have to be studied. I have not seen any standard equipment, but this can be done. It's what my conscience says. There is no fundamental difference. Only thing is interchanging.
Thank you very much, sir. I hope the participants got their questions answered. With this discussion, we would conclude today's session. For any more further questions, sir can be contacted through his mail ID kept on the present slide. I sincerely thank our management and our secretary, Madam Dr. K.S. Babai, for giving us this opportunity to host the webinar session.
Before that, I would like to thank the organizers and then the college authorities for having given the, what is called chance to present this topic on metal characterization and thermal testing. I hope the people would have enriched some knowledge based on the presentation. So thanks for your arrangement and then the well-organized webinar. Thank you, sir. Thank you for our HOD, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, sir.